this is the European corner to start the meeting. So that's really nice of you to organize that. And Sachin, Dr. Shah, very nice actually to be spending the time here. I encourage everybody here connected from anywhere in the world. Please go to LinkedIn if you want to correspond with us, connect, or ask questions about these. And Sachin, maybe I'll get immediately into the topic for these 20 minutes. Very excited to talk about biomarkers. Start with a broad question. I mean, maybe you can share your perspective on what you think the role and impact of biomarkers will be on healthcare and how we manage it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Laurent, for the question. And just before I start, a pleasure to always come back to HITLAB, and it's always exciting and invigorating conversation. So looking forward to it. I think the role digital biomarkers or digital measurements play in healthcare system is multifaceted. Obviously, my career hat on, we focus on digital biomarkers augmenting the evidence value chain in the drug development during the clinical phase trials. And then with my clinician hat on, obviously, we see the role of digital biomarkers playing in that continuous healthcare monitoring versus the previous didactic snapshot kind of way HCPs would interact with patients. I think digital biomarkers play a massive role from not only just like improving every day-to-day care from both the patient side and the HCP. So from like a patient side, we can talk about increased visibility to your healthcare professional or your healthcare system by, you know, submitting passive data or active data continuously whilst you're at home living your everyday life, therefore reflecting your disease state better rather than a snapshot that we typically see from HCP interactions. But also from a HCP point of view, you kind of get a reduced workload. It may seem like a bit of a burden initially, but once healthcare professionals get more familiar with monitoring patients via digital biomarkers, whether they are continuous monitoring or individual monitoring, often HCPs do notice a reducing workload because you've shifted the paradigm from reactive care, i.e. patients present with a specific symptomology, which usually suggests that their disease has progressed, to active monitoring or being proactive, where you're actually trying to prevent those patients from having that symptomology in the first place. And I think lastly, especially when it comes to what I do in my everyday today, we really see the value of digital measurements and digital biomarkers in introducing that objective data to previously subjective data collection. So if you have tools that are based on ECOAs, such as patient-reported outcomes, clinician-reported outcomes, etc., digital tools such as wearables can play a huge role in adding a degree of objectivity to that otherwise subjective data, which obviously introduces a whole host of bias for various reasons.
And Sachin, before we get into some question, maybe specific examples, do you actually see an evolution or an acceleration of how we use biomarkers? Because in a way, some people could say, yeah, we heard about it for the last 10 years. Is this really new? And is this really driving transformation, accelerating?
I mean, a great question. And I think I was having this discussion literally yesterday with a couple of colleagues. I think remote patient monitoring is such a good example of something that I would say is not necessarily, the concept is not necessarily new. We've had telephone clinics for years now. You've had virtual clinics for years now where, you know, consultants and healthcare professionals interact with their patients via email and or letters. I think the digital component of remote patient monitoring, I think, has ramped up. And obviously we all know that COVID, accelerated that process. But what I've been seeing when I'm talking to my more on-the-ground colleagues that still work on the front line of healthcare services is that in some degree or one way or another, that these remote patient monitoring solutions have been largely embedded into healthcare systems in some way or another. I think there are lots of therapy areas that use it more frequently than others. So dermatology is a really good example of where remote patient monitoring has just now become the norm. My wife is a general practitioner and she often has a lot of remote patient monitoring tools at her disposal, especially when she's doing virtual consultations via telemedicine or telehealth systems. I think the more sexy digital measurements and digital biomarkers, such as ML algorithms that detect subtle changes in radiological images, or fancy wearable devices that maybe process specific types of data or a collection of specific types of data to say predict exacerbations of Parkinson's disease. I think that work is still ongoing, and I still think we need a lot more relatable evidence. And I say relatable, HCP still have a degree of skepticism around the accuracy of these tools. I think the evidence is getting there. I just attended the Digital Biomarker Conference in Basel, hosted by Roche. And the amount of evidence now, a few years ago, everyone was saying, oh, we're going to do this research. And now at these conferences, people are presenting their research on how these tools, the sexy digital biomarkers, are actually showing some positive results in sensitivity and specificity when compared to your established methods of monitoring those diseases. So I think the acceleration is there for, I would say, the less sexy ones, the more infrastructure-based improvement of healthcare delivery. I think for the sexy ones, I still think we're a bit further away from seeing them being embedded in everyday healthcare.
And building on that, I mean, I'm sure in your day-to-day life in a big pharma and then in the ecosystem, I mean, what would be the few innovation that you saw or use of biomarker that you say, well, this is really striking and we'd like to share with everyone here?
Oh, great question. So what I think one of the things I've been really impressed by is big pharma have focused on the less sexy stuff, which I find very appealing. I've worked in companies, or I've seen companies that disregard the norm for the sexy stuff and it just fails. But I've seen in more recent years a lot of pharma consortiums coming together to approach regulators to say, look, this is an issue. There is an unmet healthcare need here for patients. We have a simple digital health tool in the form of a digital measurement that could be used to combat these problems. So I think very recently, a consortium led by various pharma partners such as Pfizer, Pfizer, Novartis, GSK, Takeda, went to the EMA to discuss the role that a wearable that collects actigraphy data could play in the monitoring of nocturnal scratch episodes in any condition that scratching or pruritus is an issue. A very simple solution for a very big problem. It's not unsurprising that people with an eczematous disease complain about scratching, yet we're still relying on patient-reported outcome measures to ascertain whether an intervention works or not, because obviously we can't stick them in a room for a year and watch them on a camera. So I think the way the consortiums or these pharma partners, and obviously working with the third-party wearables, working with academic bodies, coming together to approach regulatory bodies, I find that's the thing that I'm very excited by. So it's not really specific to a digital biomarker per se, but more around the process and strategy of how we are approaching people that make the decisions on whether these things could be implemented. I see that ramping up quite a lot in the last few years.
It's very interesting that you mention in a way the boring stuff or the less sexy stuff, because that's a theme that I keep hearing. Actually, don't just go with the sexy, because sometimes the boring or less visible creates a lot of volume, a lot of value, and that leads to actually my next question. I mean, do you see these taking scale? In the not just in the industry, but maybe in the patient usage and the usage for the patient in managing our health, and maybe connected to value-based healthcare, or maybe personalized decision on the go every day?
I think that is the golden question, right? I think every time you attend conferences, everyone's asking around, how do I get a return on investment, or how do I calculate a return on investment, and how do I talk about scalability, especially if you're talking cross geography. I think if you stick to one geography, so I think Lundbeck do it very well in Denmark, and they keep it within Denmark, and they have no plans to scale outside of Denmark, and it works really well. But that scalability question is large in part the most difficult problem to solve. And ultimately, I think the companies that are doing it really well are your consumer facing companies. So your Apples, your Googles, right? They have, millions of everyday people wearing healthcare. I wouldn't say they're necessarily medical grade, but these consumer grade wearables that monitor everyday aspects of health. That the literature has a plethora of evidence that suggests that just monitoring your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your step count, blah, 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 all these simple tools can actually correlate to your everyday state of health and predict your disease severity. So for example, metabolic syndrome, I know we don't really use that term anymore, but obviously the notion that, you know, if you just keep healthy every day, eat well, drink well, sleep well, etc., you're going to live longer, you know, evade common diseases like heart disease, diabetes, reduce your risk of cancers, etc. Actually, a lot of that is just monitored with your smartphone, with your wearable. And I think what we're seeing now is patients are more upskilled in inferring this data, what it means when they get a notification that, oh, your heart rate's been a bit higher the last few days, have you tried exercising, stuff like that. I think a lot more everyday people now are a bit more, oh, actually, yeah, I haven't stood up today, I've been at my desk for 6 hours, I better stand up. So I think we're actually seeing a shift more from the consumer side that now pushes it into the traditional healthcare system delivery models. So healthcare providers haven't got a choice but to start acknowledging this type of new data streams, this novel information set, and embedding it into how they deliver healthcare.
And you know, the question it leads to is obviously with all these biomarkers, sensors, and you were showing your watch and phone and so on. Do you think we have enough, let's say, ethical framework to protect this data and make sure it's used for the patient and not on the patient or beside the patient?
I guess the ultimate answer is, I think we could always strive to do better when it comes to communicating the data privacy and data security risks when obtaining this data. Back to the consumer grade healthcare argument, no one reads the terms and conditions. We all scroll to the bottom. We all tick accept, right? We're busy people. Everyone has 100,000 things to do, 100 other things to worry about. My data is not important. I don't care. Tick the box. I think it's the responsibility of the people collecting the data to make sure that those essentially e-consents are a lot more streamlined and the key information is there for people to understand. Obviously, the introduction of GDPR, which is now old news, has really transformed how we do that. You know, you can't go on a website now without agreeing to cookies necessary or, you know, marketing based. I think we're moving there, but I think everybody needs to take a bit of responsibility when it comes to data security, but ultimately the onus should be on the companies that are collecting that data. So that can be the Apples, that can be the GSKs. I mean, we do it really well for clinical trial data, right? Clinical trial data is ironclad in the way we obtain like traditional human tissue samples, et cetera, et cetera. I don't understand, or I guess the question is, why is that not being translated into digital data? But that seems to be a more pan-industry issue, I guess, like in fintech, in legal tech, in all those other, all of the tech industries that are booming right now. They all, come across the same issues around instilling confidence in the consumer around, data security and privacy.
Yeah, and I'll lead not necessarily the last question. I'm just watching the time, but I think for the people here on the line, and then for yourself, I mean, as you have a couple of minutes, what would be your, I wouldn't say dream, but maybe the thing you would love to achieve and do on new biomarkers or so on, maybe for the next few years, and maybe advice you would give to the ones listening.
So my dream and what I'm actively working towards is to get a digital endpoint approved by a regulatory body for the intervention, for the assessment of an intervention for any disease area. That would be the dream. I think we've had a couple of examples in the media recently, some positive, some negative. And I just think this is the barrier to mass adoption of digital biomarker or digital measurements in the clinical trial for drug development. I think if we can get one solid win under our belt, I say we as a pharma consortium under our belt, I think that will just start snowballing the effects. I think the advice I always give to people is pharma always tend to approach partnerships as a didactic interrelationship. I need a service, go provide the service, don't give any support, and then the service is provided and pharma are upset, relationships break down. I think the only way we'll see progression in this space, and that's just not even just digital biomarkers, in the DHT space globally, is by realizing that this is a partnership model. It takes a village to raise a baby type idea, right? The people that are experts in healthcare delivery need to work, use their expertise and leverage the people that are experts in tech, need to use the leverage of payers and providers, need to leverage the pharma, need to leverage the academics, and all come together to really understand, right, how do we transform healthcare, using this combined collective of intelligence to embed and implement digital health tools into everyday healthcare, from you being at home monitoring your own activity, step count, whatever, to your primary care physician keeping an eye on your healthcare as a whole, feeding into your secondary care if you have any diseases or comorbidities, tertiary care if unfortunately you need to get to that level of care, with an overarching access to data from academic bodies that could now use that data to conduct research that could better improve the quality of care, because we're getting better patient understanding, better disease state understanding, the natural history of disease progression, and then using that data to fuel drug discovery and innovation, both from traditional pharma innovation to tech innovation, because that data is now it was ethically sourced, curated and collected appropriately, and therefore usable for all these different health streams.
Look, maybe I'll take one question. What do we have? Maybe we have just a quick 30 seconds. And please send the question to Sachin or myself. I don't think we have time to answer all of them. But somebody was asking, do you see very good partners that you're working with that do what you explained very well? And maybe you can mention a few that people could contact or refer to.
Yeah, I think I have worked in both the large organizations and startups. The success stories always come from being able to identify the third parties that aren't, so the startups or the small organizations that aren't arrogant, and also finding the people within the large organizations that aren't arrogant, that want to work together. I think there are loads of companies out there that have shown really good ways of working with large organizations and small organizations. Just from my experience, even big ones. So I think Axigraph have got really good relationships with various large pharma organizations, and they also are happy to work with smaller companies that may have offerings that they can't provide. So they've really embedded that sort of partnership model. I think there's companies like Empatica and Connexa and VivaSense, all these companies that kind of have a device or a wearable or an SAMD, but also provide you that kind of platform plug and play model in addition to whatever their core offering is. So that's a couple of examples that I have.